It's been 5 years since Hong Kong adopted the national security law. Its provisions were first introduced in 2019 as a response to the 2019 anti-government protests against a controversial extradition bill. Under the national security law, authorities have sweeping powers to clamp down on dissent. It criminalizes secession, subversion, terrorism, and collusion with foreign forces. These four main crimes are punishable with a maximum sentence of life behind bars, and it applies to crimes committed within and outside Hong Kong. There are other notable provisions, including sending some cases to be tried in the mainland, putting suspects under surveillance, or banning convicts from standing for public office. More than 300 people have been arrested under the law in the last 5 years. At least 14 news outlets, including Apple Daily, have closed. Human Rights Watch adds that nearly 100 civil society organizations, labor unions, and political parties have disbanded since the adoption of the national security law. Hong Kong officials have defended the law, saying the city needs to prioritize security and make it part of its culture. In 2024, Hong Kong adopted the Safeguarding National Security Ordinance to augment the 2020 legislation. It targets crimes such as sabotage, sedition, the theft of state secrets, and espionage. For more analysis, Professor Lok-Sang, director at the Sutong Shanghai-Hong Kong Economic Policy Research Institute at Lingnan University, joins us live. Professor, thank you for making the time to speak with us. It has been 5 years since Beijing's national security law came into effect. What's changed in the city since then?
I think the city has benefited from the NSL. In fact, prior to the implementation of the NSL, the city had been under threat, from a lot of unstabilizing forces. And right now, we see that the city has now been much more stable. The investment climate, business climate has improved, especially for overseas companies coming to Hong Kong. But to me, there are two kinds of implementation. One I call preventive implementation. The other one I call judicial implementation. As far as judicial implementation is concerned, I can see no excesses in the sense that all of those cases that had resulted in convictions. And I also noticed that the sentences that have been handed out are not too harsh. In the extreme case, there was one incident with the one who plotted the killing of police officers. Okay, the one who organized this plot to kill police officers. He was convicted and he was sentenced to 23 years plus. And I think that is the most serious, most harsh, the harshest sentence handed out so far. Most are actually quite reasonable, and I would say that that one is also quite reasonable, because that is a plot to kill police officers, and I agree that it's very serious. But on the other hand, I think that there's another aspect of implementation that I call preventive implementation, which is without any relationship to judicial judgments, but just as the authorities are concerned about, for example, are some books that are in the public libraries that could it be a bit sensitive, and these have been some of those considered sensitive have been taken down the shelves, and I think that is a bit excessive. And also recently there was the suggestion that, for example, eateries, those of the restaurants, the owners, the operators of the restaurants may be held accountable if some staff have offended the national security law. And I think that is also a bit excessive. We haven't seen any excesses in judicial implementation in the sense of the court judgments, they have so far been quite reasonable. And not too many people have been convicted, actually, considering that the city has 7.5 million people, these just about 300 people sentenced. It's not really a big number.
Professor, looking at some of the cases that you mentioned, has the security law achieved what the Chinese and Hong Kong governments set out to do with this legislation?
Yes. As I said, society has come back to normal. During those years in 2019, 2020, we had seen a lot of disruptions, to social life. People cannot even commute to work normally, because very often all the traffic have been stopped. Even I noticed that even police vehicles have been stopped, at some checkpoints, by those protesters. They call themselves protesters, but in fact they really lawless and causing a lot of inconvenience and even producing risks, to innocent citizens.
Professor, you mentioned that life is clearly different from 2019 and 2020, but recently Chinese officials have warned of a soft resistance that still exists in Hong Kong. Yeah. What do they mean by this, and what exactly are they concerned about?
Yes, that is the aspect of excess. I mentioned about excessive preventive implementation. You want to prevent possible risks, and then a lot of officials have been a bit excessively sensitive, to the extent that some dissenting voices, they are effectively stopped, and I think that is not quite good, In fact, in my view, all kinds of topics can be discussed, for example, in universities, no matter how sensitive it is. The most important thing is for there to be a dialogue, in the sense that you have opposing different views. If I think it's not right, for some of these, for example, those people who are in favor of Hong Kong separating from China. Okay, that is not right. But it's not for me to say that it's right or wrong. I think for some people, it's important for them to reach the conclusion why it is bad for Hong Kong people, why it's bad for China, why it may be even bad for the world. So I think if you have some kind of intelligent dialogue with different views presented, so those people can examine the different arguments and draw their own conclusions. And I think that's much better than just preventing disallowing discussion at all.
You mentioned allowing space for different views. The city's last major opposition party, yes, that was heavily involved in protest movements, the League of Social Democrats, has just disbanded. What's the significance of this, and what does this say about the city's political future?
Well, they not only that one. The Democratic Party is also being disbanded, and I think it is a bit disappointing for me. I would have preferred that some dissenting voices be allowed. Dissent, sometimes the arguments, what they make sense, sometimes they do not make sense, but I would welcome different views, and I think intelligent dialogue is really the most important thing. We are educated people. We should be able to examine different views, and of course, there are some some propaganda, okay, which is false, and things. There should be some. There should be some red lines. You shouldn't spread false news, so-called news. This fake news is very risky, and you shouldn't spread the rumors which have no basis whatsoever. And I think apart from these red lines, which includes also slandering people, and I think different views should be allowed so that there can be intelligent examination of different discourses.
Thank you for sharing your insights with us. We were speaking to Professor Lok-Sang, Director at the Sutong Shanghai-Hong Kong Economic Policy Research Institute at Lingnan University.